In the Philippines, people may survive their illnesses, but not the financial burden that comes with the treatment.
Development money that is supposed to be fighting poverty, supposed to be advancing healthcare for all, is actually going into these incredibly expensive, exploitative private hospitals.
Ayala Corp invested into healthcare in 2015, and our goal was to try to address fundamental gaps in the system.
When you're dealing with for-profit hospitals, the motivation is to make money.
They're actually exacerbating healthcare inequality, and they are pushing people into poverty.
In 2022, a young woman living on the outskirts of Manila suffered a seizure and was rushed to the hospital by her mother. Because the case was so severe, they chose to go to a nearby private facility. Sarah and her mother requested we shield their identities because they fear retribution for telling their story.
Nung dinala po siya sa ICU, 2 a.m. po yata ng gabi yun. Pero bago po palang dinala sa pinaliwanag na po pala sa akin sa ER na ang confinement ng pasyente po, kasi private daw po yun, 30K to 40K per day po. So ako naman, syempre po, buhay po ng anak ko yung tinakbo ko.
40,000 pesos, or about $700, is more than the family could afford. But the mother was desperate. She had no way of knowing that her daughter wouldn't be allowed to leave for days, even after she was medically ready for discharge.
Pinuntahan po siya sa ICU ng doktor niya. Sabi, magaling na pala to eh. So sabi ko, wala po kaming kapera-pera.
The hospital the young woman was held at was part of a chain of facilities owned by a company called Ayala, one of the largest conglomerates in the Philippines. In Manila, Ayala is hard to miss. High-end residential neighborhoods, the central business district downtown, even the building Bloomberg works out of is owned by them. It's called Ayala Tower 1 on Ayala Avenue. Ayala makes more than $5 billion a year in revenue, but its hospital division, AC Health, has another source of funding.
What we found was the company that owns these hospitals has received $100 million from the World Bank's investment arm, the IFC, which is money that's earmarked for poverty alleviation.
The IFC, or International Finance Corporation, uses taxpayer funds from countries like Germany, Japan, and the United States to reduce poverty by building up private enterprise in the developing world. But a Bloomberg investigation has found that it's also funded hospital companies with a history of abusive practices.
We looked at private hospitals in Kenya, in Uganda, in the Philippines, India, and elsewhere. And in all of those countries, we found patient rights abuses like detention of patients, detention of corpses, in some instances denial of emergency care, quite prevalent across society. Before the IFC invests in any project, they do a deep due diligence dive. Now, what they're looking at is, the health and safety policies, the human resources policies and manuals, life and fire safety plans, and quite in-depth looks at the group's policy on child labour. But across all these documents, there is not one mention at all about patient rights.
The IFC is choosing to invest in countries where the regulation of for-profit private healthcare is woefully inadequate.
Anna Marriott looked into reports of hospital abuses at IFC-supported facilities for the NGO Oxfam.
These are multi-billion-dollar institutions with huge resource at their disposal for due diligence. Yet, it doesn't seem to me that those due diligence are throwing up these cases. Are they not looking for them? Are they not looking for them because they don't want to find them?
The practice of hospital detentions was supposed to have been banned in the Philippines by 2008, after lawmakers passed the Anti-Hospital Detention Law. But the law has loopholes that private hospitals have continued to exploit, including the fact that it only covers patients who stay in general wards, not private rooms. Between 2021 and 2024, there were more than 1,250 complaints to the Philippine Department of Health of people alleging their loved ones were held against their will at private hospitals.
We use social media posts to examine stories of people who were hospitalized for extended periods, and then we tried to contact them. A number of them turned out to be willing to share their stories about what it's like to be hospitalized. What this reporting reveals is that in the Philippines, people may survive their illnesses, but not the financial burden that comes with the treatment.
In 2022, a gravely ill 31-year-old man named Cesar Banales was admitted to an Ayala-owned hospital. After about 5 weeks, medical records show he was healthy enough to go home, but he'd burned through his insurance and money borrowed from family and friends, and was told he couldn't leave until he paid the majority of his bill.
This is the hospital bill. Now what's interesting is that it shows an MGH date here. That stands for May Go Home date. So that is the date at which this patient was deemed to be medically well enough to be discharged from the hospital. It's the 25th of March. But up here you've got another date, and this is the 31st of March. So that's the date on which this patient actually left the hospital. And that was the period when they were trying to get the money together to get out of the hospital.
The hospitals where Banales and Sarah were held did not directly receive funding from the IFC. But around the same time they were both treated, the fund loaned $100 million to the company that owned them to build a new state-of-the-art cancer center.
We launched the cancer hospital, the Healthway Cancer Care Hospital last Friday. It's located in Arca South in Taguig in an Ayala land development. And the goal is to provide more affordable private cancer care for our fellow Filipinos.
Ramdam ko man para kaming nasa bilibid, para kaming preso, hinatiran na lang ng pagkain. So nakaka-stress kasi nakatanaw lang ako sa bintana maghihintay lang ng pagkain pag oras ng kainan, pero iniisip ko yung utang ko na malaki. So minsan napapaluha na lang ako, nasa CR ako, hindi ko pinapakita sa kanya.
It took Sarah and her mother 8 days to come up with enough cash, government assistance and collateral to get her out of the hospital. They ended up turning over one of their most valuable possessions, the family motorbike.
Nalungkot po ako, pero sabi ko motor lang yun, basta gumaling yung anak ko pag nandito yung anak ko. Mas mahalaga yung buhay ng anak ko.
We're seeing that these development banks have invested billions of development funds that are supposed to be fighting poverty and advancing healthcare for all, being invested in these for-profit hospitals. I don't think their investments are working at all. I don't think they're delivering anything like what they're claiming. In fact, I would say the opposite is true. Far from reaching poor people without access to healthcare, they're actually helping to impoverish patients who attend these hospitals.